Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Hi, I'm Johnny Fortune with the National Institute of Building Sciences, your host for the podcast. We'd like to welcome today to the podcast Dr. John Messner from Penn State University, longtime supporter of NIBS, longtime contributor of many of the work that NIBS does. And so, John, welcome. So glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Johnny. Really glad to be here.
So you are a bit of a superstar in this industry. I can't tell you how many times your name has come up in so many conferences. Long time history and contributor. And tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and how you came to where you are today.
Well, thanks for the kind words. Yeah, Johnny, I'm a professor at Penn State University. So I joined Penn State 23 years ago now. So I've been here for quite some time. After doing my graduate work here and then spending 7 years out in industry working for a general contractor and a developer. So it's just been a really, really good pleasure to come back to Penn State and be able to be part of the faculty here at the university.
So what's some of your fun time? What's your passion or your hobby? What do you like to do?
Oh, when I'm not in my office or working, I like to be outside, and so I do a lot of camping, a lot of hiking, and pretty active in Boy Scouts. So really enjoy being outdoors and being out there with some other people. So that keeps me busy.
Wow, I didn't know that. I was also involved in that for many years myself. A lot of fun, a lot of great life lessons there. So in your day-to-day work, and I know you know from a limited view, those who work in higher ed, there's a great commitment, a lot of mentorship, a lot of work that is done that you're not always compensated for. So what motivates you day to day in your work?
I mean, I just really enjoy being at a university because I get a chance to do research, and some of that really is what connects in with NIBS and the National BIM Standard effort and some of those volunteer activities. And so I really like to look at topics to help change the industry. But I also, I think one of the other greatest ways to change the industry is to be able to play a small role in educating people that go out and are change agents. And so I think that's one of the things that really I have a passion for and really motivates me to show up every day.
Yeah, I mean, you're leaving an incredible legacy. So many people I've worked with in this industry have come through your program and speak very highly of you. You mentioned NIBS, the National Institute of Building Sciences, and the National BIM Standard, and it just reminded me, that I've known you for over a decade now. You and I have had the pleasure of working together on several committees in different capacities, and you've always been an incredible supporter and very helpful and very humble and always providing meaningful content. So on behalf of NIBS, I just want to thank you for all you've done over the many years, how you have contributed. So let's talk about the National BIM Standard. Exciting times. The new version is coming out in the fall of 2023. So depending on when our audience is listening to this podcast, it may be just on the doorsteps or it may have just recently come out. But for those that are not familiar with BIM or building information management in general, what would you say is a key why BIM in itself is important?
I mean, I think one of the most important things in delivering and operating facilities, whether they're building or infrastructure, is really information. And if we have information, we can make better decisions. We can put together better designs and construction plans, but we need that information and it needs to be organized. And in order to do that today, the best way to do that is digitally. And so I think when we think about it, building information management, and building information modeling. Essentially, we're talking about how we leverage digital information about our built assets and use that information throughout the life cycle. And so that's really the way that we can achieve the best results throughout all the different life cycle phases of a project.
Very good. Well, you kind of answered that some in your last answer, but I want to throw this on out there just for people that may be new to hearing, hey, there's a national BIM standard. So why is it needed? Why is it out there?
I mean, I think the National BIM Standard plays a key role, along with a lot of other standards, in enabling us to put together common ways of doing work. And so if we can put together ways that people can reproduce, that they can learn from their last experience and continue to improve, and I think we've really achieved an important goal of being able to get some standardization in our work practice. A lot of times people think of standards as not always being very innovative, but I think innovation really comes when we standardize the approaches that we use for those common things. And so as we put together standard practice, then we can really focus our time on more innovative ways to achieve important things like high quality designs, construction, and operations of our buildings.
Yeah, I appreciate the approach, to continuous improvement. I've been a student and a proponent of performance improvement for many years and finding ways to improve. And certainly, anytime there's an opportunity for productivity or efficiency gains, or being more effective, at the heart of it is, as you say, standards. And it's important to have those in place to be able to enable those efficiencies. So there are standards that happen on the international level as well, and there are also different companies that may have a set of standards that they apply on a project. So where do you see the national BIM standard within that framework of in comparison to international standards, and then as a follow up to that, as it relates to project based standards?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really important international standards related to BIM. One of the most important, some of the viewers may be familiar with IFC, Industry Foundation classes, that are put together as a common way to define the pieces and parts of building an infrastructure projects, so that when we call something a door or a wall, everyone knows what we're talking about, and there's a common data schema to support that. So that's a really good example of an international standard. There's no reason for us to have a different standard here in the US than what we have internationally, and that'd be quite inefficient to do that. But we do have things at a national level that are customized in our industry, and classification systems and the way we approach certain things, that it makes sense for us to have a national approach that leverages those international standards to be able to do that. So that's where really the sweet spot of the National BIM Standard is, really leveraging those international standards, being able to apply them in the U.S. marketplace. And also, I think we develop some standards that I think can be valuable to help push back up to those international standards as well. And then I think you mentioned on a company level or an organizational level, you look at a company, or you look at a government agency, they may have their own ways of doing work. Sometimes they're referenced as standards, but really looking at specific owner requirements that they have. And I think that a key part of the U.S. National BIM Standard is it can be part of those requirements and be referenced in as part of those requirements, so that an owner doesn't need to maintain a custom way of doing something within just their organization, but they can leverage what the industry is doing as a standard, and that's more efficient for both the owner and for the project teams.
Yeah, several folks I've talked to, you mentioned federal agencies, the folks that I've talked to within those agencies, they generally don't want to be about the business of developing BIM standards, right? They are focused on facilities, design and development and construction and operations, and so the U.S. National BIM Standard is becomes a great asset to them.
Yeah, we even have
So
that here at Penn State. I mean, I have the pleasure to work with our facility group here at Penn State, and we have our own set of standards and requirements at the university level, but we really leverage as best we can the U.S. National BIM Standard, and really looking forward to this new version because that'll really help us be able to do that even more.
So would you say then the National BIM Standard kind of fills this gap that's between what's happening and defined at the international level, which is very, very broad, obviously applying internationally and globally, and where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, on actual projects where it is implemented. So you see the National BIM Standard as bridging those two different perspectives?
I definitely see it playing that role. Give you maybe an example. If you look at international standards, they may tell you that you need to create a BIM execution plan and put a couple sentences in there about what a BIM execution plan is. Our U.S. National BIM Standard has a detailed documentation of everything that should be in the BIM execution plan, both required and optional. And then as an owner, for example, here at Penn State, we're going to look at referencing that, and we may customize it slightly to fit our needs, but essentially just leverage everything from the U.S. National BIM Standard.
Very good. So you mentioned version 4 of the National BIM Standard. For those that don't have the extended history that you have, I think you've been involved in every version, right?
So I was not involved in version 1, part 1. So I stepped in version 2, but certainly well aware of what's in each of the versions. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. That dates back to around 2007, 2008 or so. It goes a ways back. Many years of involvement.
Yeah, I think version 1 was 2007, if I recall correctly, and then 2012, 2015, and now we'll be going to 2023.
So what our audience may or may not know is that you are the chair of the National BIM Standard Planning Committee. So you have been involved in the last 3 to 5 years, I guess, here of this version. That is quite a commitment from a volunteer, John. You must really care about this content and this initiative.
I mean, I have quite a tie to the U.S. National BIM Standard. For many years, we were able to put some of our research efforts to work and develop some content that was published in version 2 and version 3, and now in version 4, working with work groups in a bit of a different structure. But I just feel that I just have a deep passion that I think this is really important. And our team we've had a lot of volunteers, and I really appreciate all the volunteers as well as the NIBS staff who have been really actively engaged over the last 3 years to put this next version together. I mean, it's been in conversations for longer than 3 years, but I think we've had work groups working on content for the last 3 years to contribute to this version.
So this version, those who have not been involved in helping to develop pieces of it or have not reviewed it, what can you tell the audience about what's different between version 3 and this current version 4?
Yeah, maybe I'll just give a really brief history of the version. So version 1 really laid out a plan for how we would develop a U.S. National BIM standard and what should be in it. And so it was a standard way to develop the standard. It was
Mm.
essentially what was in version 1 and some good definitions and background. And so version 2 and version 3 were developed in a similar manner. And they were developed by people proposing content to the planning committee and the project committee of NBIMS. And then in presenting that content, getting some feedback, and then that content was balloted. And then if the committees felt that that content should be in the National BIM Standard, then it was pulled into the National BIM Standard. Version 4 is very different because in version 2 and 3, while there was some organization to try to encourage certain types of content, there was never really a cohesive compiling of that content into a singular type of consistent format. And so in version 4, we essentially developed an outline of the most important content that was either already in version 2 and 3 or that we felt was really critical to develop. And we put together work groups that created custom content that we now are going through a detailed consensus process to get everything to work closely together, which we didn't have in some of those earlier versions. I still think there's some great content in those earlier versions, but it wasn't tied all together like version 4 will be. Another thing with version 4 is we're also changing the format of it, putting it online so that it will be a lot easier for users to access and view and reference some of the parts of that content.
Very interesting. So can you talk a little bit about the different structure of version 4 and then also maybe the different content types that are going into this version?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've looked at doing, and I think everybody on the planning committee felt was really important, was that we reconsider the approach to how we manage the standard and put together different sections. And sometimes we refer to them as modules or sections. These are really content areas that a work group will manage. So we have right now in NBIMS version 4, we have several work groups that are working on content sections. One is for project BIM requirements, one is for BIM execution planning, one is for BIM use and use definitions, one is for COBie, and then the fifth one is for information standards. So these sections will be maintained at a much more frequent rate than we've done in the past so that we can make sure that the standard stays up to date with things that are going on in the industry, and the work groups curate the content in those different sections. And so a section can have different pieces of content though. So it can have a standard, and a standard is something that we can test against, right? So that we can look at it.
Yeah.
We can determine if someone's complying with that standard, so I can use it in a contract if I want to, or I can put it in my project requirements, and that way I know that we're following that consistent method. But we are also going to include templates in there, so that people can leverage those templates to make it easy to implement and adopt. We're going to put some guidelines in each section so that it provides some guidance to project teams, as well as we'll have some other different items depending on the section. They may include things like a common schema for information exchanges. So people may be familiar with COBie, which is really the handoff of information from design and construction into operations. COBie really outlines a standard information exchange definition. So there's different types of content, but those content types are organized into these different sections of the standard.
So I really like the idea of this modular approach. Do you anticipate that it will be more like agile, that some modules are fine as they are, and maybe they are not updated for a couple of years, and other modules need more rapid updating? Is that the intent of kind of breaking these pieces apart into different modules?
Yeah, that's the exact intent of that, is that if we can get it set up and as changes are needed or beneficial, then we can have an agile approach to just making sometimes maybe minor changes as we go through and really continuously improve what we have in the standards. Obviously, it is important for me to note, though, that these are standards that we want people to be referencing in contracts. So it's not like we're going to be updating them every week or two, but we
Yeah,
will come out with periodic changes. We will archive and have permanent links to exact versions so that people can rely upon the standard that they used on the date that they incorporated it. So we're trying to put that balance in there of making sure that we're continuously improving while enabling people to leverage them in contracts and not changing the approach every more frequently than we need to.
sure. Well, I do like also the separation of some of the content types. Sometimes when folks are reading it for the first time, they really need to, dive into the guidance section and understand it a little bit better. And then, sometimes people are just needing to get right to what is the standard, and so they can immediately go to that section. So I think it's been well thought out, well put together, well planned, with the help of your leadership and many other leaders, and the volunteers and the National BIM Standards. It's been an incredible work and a heavy lift. There's quite a bit to what I think most people who are not involved may not realize. There's quite a bit of coordination, collaboration that has to happen across these different work groups to ensure that the terminology, is the same, and that we're not creating unintended conflicts with other modules.
Yeah, we've had plenty of conversations about a definition in a work group that might go on for a half an hour. And then we get together with another work group and they had the same conversation and came up with a different answer. So then we have to work together
Yeah.
and figure out a solution to that. But that's really what's important about a consensus process. And so I think that's how we create standards that can last the test of time, is by having more people involved and having some of those conversations.
So, John, what would, and again, depending on the timing of when the audience, listens to or views this podcast, it's coming out soon, or it's recently come out, the National BIM Standard version 4. With your planning committee chair hat on, and all the work and effort that's gone in for the many years, what are the things you would ask people to do with this standard? What would you ask them to do personally?
I mean, I think it's really important for people to become familiar and aware with what is in the standard, what are the main sections, and learn about how they might be able to leverage them in their projects. And so it may depend on what role you play. If you're an owner, you're developing your own project requirements that you may have out there for BIM. I hope that you strongly consider leveraging the content in the standard and embedding that, or bringing some of that into your own requirements. If you're a project team member, I think there's some good methods in there for BIM execution planning, BIM uses that you can really leverage to do your tasks in a better, more standard, more consistent way by leveraging the standard. So hopefully, just go to the website as it gets published, and we're going to have content on there, an overview with some guidelines for how to use the standard and what's in the standard. So I just ask everybody to read that and consider adopting that. Certainly, we are. I would lose an opportunity here if I also didn't give a bit of a plug to say, we're not done with version. Once we're done with version 4, we have some new work groups that we're going to be forming in the near future as we think about the next set of content to develop. And so we're always looking for volunteers as well if people are interested in getting more involved.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to jump onto the shameless plug, I will say, yes, join NIBS as an individual or as an organization and identify with that you want to participate in the Building Information Management Council, and also sign up for these work groups, get involved in the National BIM Standard, various work groups that are going to continue to work. So very exciting time. I'd like to switch gears just momentarily to talk about some emerging technologies, because the standards always run a little bit behind some of the emerging technologies and innovation in general, and then it really takes a lot of effort to put together a standard, especially of the volume of the National BIM Standard. And I'm just curious. I'd just like to pick your brain on what you see are some important emerging technologies for the built environment, for our industry. What are you seeing, John? What are you thinking about how things are transpiring here?
Certainly, I get a chance to do research with our team here on a lot of different topics. I mean, some of the things that I think are really important topics right now are looking at how we deal with some of the challenges in the workforce. And I think one of the best ways that we can approach some of that is to look at how we can help with automation of some of our tasks and moving toward a more industrialized construction approach to things, where we're putting things in factories, prefabricating, modularizing things, and then automating as many of some of those tasks as we can in order to achieve higher quality, have a safer work environment for the workforce, and be able to build the amount of things that we need to build with some of the limited workforce that we currently have. So I really, we're focused on a lot of research in that area. You hear a lot about AI and machine learning and things like that. I think they're also really important, but I want to kind of bring that back to the National BIM Standard, because I think all of these things require structured information. And so
Yeah.
if we don't have solid ways of creating consistent structured information on projects, we can't really do some of the things that we might be able to do with this advanced technology. And that's really what we're trying to do with the National BIM Standard, or just in general standards in BIM, is try to get information in a way that we can feed some of these advanced areas.
Absolutely. I've been telling a lot of folks that, almost everything that we are wanting to do in this industry requires good data, or as you say, structured data, structured information, and that requires standards. So that's why we're continuing to push on the standards front. So I love this small segment of our episodes. We always like to try to have a little fun question, a bonus question. I like to think of it as a bonus question for those who have listened to the entire podcast, but would love to leave our audience with some little known fact about yourself, something that folks might not be able to find in your bio or on your LinkedIn, but just some little fun fact or something important to you or something interesting you're willing to share with us.
Wow, maybe just maybe a fun fact and something that is very important to me is I started by talking about enjoying to be outdoors when I as a hobby. And so one thing that I short story that's important is when I got engaged, which was quite some time ago now, to my wife. We went to Yosemite and hiked up to the top of El Capitan and camped out on the top of El Capitan, and that's where we got engaged. She was not so thrilled, by the way, about the hike to the top of El Cap, because she was pretty jet lagged, and I kind of had to push a little bit to make sure that we got there. But I think overall it was fun and it was important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you certainly let her catch her breath at the top before so she could answer, right? That's great. I love that story. Well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today. Give us this overview of the National BIM Standard. I think takeaways our audience could gather from this is that, it's a new version. It's an improvement upon previous versions. It's got a new format, a modular structure, a lot of additional content that was not available before. And I think the key ask is, to get people to go out and read it, provide feedback where they can, get involved where they can. But most importantly is to begin to apply it on their projects, apply it in their organizations. And so, John, again, I enjoyed working with you so many years. You're a great friend and colleague. And any additional comments you want to share with our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you for inviting me to this podcast, but also for the many years of working together and being colleagues and friends. It's been great to work with NIBS. Maybe one thing that we didn't talk about is, why the National BIM Standard is at NIBS. And I think NIBS is really one of those organizations that is not directly tied to any particular sector or trade or any part of the industry. And I think it's just a great place to house the National BIM Standard. And I really appreciate working with all of the staff and the volunteers. It's just been really rewarding through the years to be able to do that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I mean, that is a NIBS' role is convening experts to identify and bring about solutions. So thank you for recognizing that. Well, folks, this has been an awesome time to sit down and talk with Dr. Messner. Just a wealth of knowledge. John, I'd love, in future episodes, want to bring you back. We got so many things that we could talk about, but would love to have you back in future episodes in a wide array of topics. And thanks to everybody listening in today. Just want to encourage you to subscribe to our podcast. If you're listening to the audio only version, head on over to YouTube and get the enhanced visual version of our podcast. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll continue to unpack some of the work that is happening at the National Institute of Building Sciences, as well as opportunities, challenges, opportunities, solutions, and emerging technology for the industry. Thanks so much. See you next time.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.